This is the long one.
I know. I have to pull up the notes app. Who? You guys. I just said guys in the weirdest voice ever. No option to delete them. Ted. Oh, Brian. Ted. And I'm like, many such cases, episode 4, which is wild. It's 4, right? Yes. We did a feelings check-in. We did a little quick haterade check-in. We covered Dracula. We covered channels. We, as always, most predictable. Channel economics, channel feeds, channel DAOs. Quickly talked about feed changes, different updates. We talked about a lot in between that. And then we really quickly landed on Solana stuff. And what was the last thing we talked about?
The UI changes and memecoin.
Memecoins.
On the next episode.
Memecoins. Okay. Memecoins next episode. Anyways, we had, I don't know. Guys, recording with Johnny is like the best thing ever. I don't know what else to say. It's like the best way to start my Saturday morning. And there's secret alpha at the end. So pay attention until the end because we drop some alpha and that's it.
Hell yeah. Let's go.
I'm like so neurotic about recording now that I test it like 5 times.
Good. All right. We have a bunch of stuff. We have this huge list of things to go through.
We have so much to go through.
Let's just start at the top of the list.
Feelings check-in. Thank you. Yes. Shout out to Boys Club for the feelings check-in inspiration. But Johnny, how are you doing?
Yes. Shout out to Boys Club. That's like one of my favorite things about their podcast is the feelings check-in. So I think that more people should do this. And so I'm doing good. I had a kid last week, so that was a big deal.
It feels weird to woo about a kid.
Yeah.
Woo!
It's funny. It's like harder in some ways and easier in other ways. So far, so good. I think like the first week is kind of easy because they sleep a lot. So we'll see how that evolves. But so far, so good. I kind of planned
a little baby boy.
Right? Yes, a little baby boy dad. Two boys now. I planned to take some time off, but that didn't happen. So
We've all seen you stay super active in the meme channel. Meme channel has maintained peak activity despite you being a brand new.
It's been a big week in the memes channel. There's been some new developments which we should get into on the like structure of the feed and moderation and curation and some of the things that we talked about last time. So good. It's a good week. How are you doing? Are you gonna get a place in the country, start a taco stand? What's the plan here?
When you're just firing on all cylinders and then one morning you wake up and you're like, what am I doing?
Yes.
That was me earlier this week where I was like traveling for 3 weeks, working my ass off on like 100 different things. And then all of a sudden like woke up and was like, what am I doing? I just want a very simple life. And I kind of casted that cast and was like, everyone's going to be like, this chick's crazy. And then everyone was like, absolutely 100% yes. I felt exactly the same way, which made me feel so much better. Better. So start of the week was a little wobbly and now I'm feeling like, okay, I'm back home. I'm feeling better. I was like super sick and now I can start putting my life together. So I'm happy.
Yeah, I totally relate to the feeling. That's why we moved to Wyoming last year. So a big part of it was that feeling of like, fuck, what are we doing? Like just grinding day in and day out. I still feel like I'm doing that, but it also feels like I can unplug and I'm in this like really remote, beautiful place. And I thought it's weird. It's a weird thing to do. And I thought more people would think it's weird. But anytime I tell people, they're like, that's amazing. Like, I want to do that. And I'm always like a little surprised how common that feeling is, of like wanting to disconnect. And I can relate.
Yeah. I'm inspired by you. I remember when we went surfing in Malibu and you were like, no, I live in Wyoming now. And I was like, what? And like from that moment on, I was like, this is goals. I was like, everything I do needs to aspire to this moment. So that is fun. But yeah, I know. And then people are like, oh, great job with everything going on. Hope it's not too stressful. It seems like it's great. And I feel like duck syndrome. Like, have you heard about, we talked about it a lot at school, where beneath the water, a duck could be like furiously paddling his flippers. I don't know, his feet. I don't know what to call it. But above the water, he looks like calm, cool, and collected. But under the water, he's like totally thrashing, freaking out. I feel a little bit duck syndrome. So just anyone listening, watching, know that if you also feel like you're thrashing underwater, you are not alone.
Yeah, that's like kind of a profound point. I think it's a big part. I think of being a good leader, and being also a good like team member. It's like you want to be cool, calm, and collected under duress. It's hard to make good decisions when you let the stress of what's going on around you start to impact what's going on inside of you. It's very difficult, and I like it's not it's like unnatural, like just to like veer off for a minute. I mean, I remember like I got really into climbing maybe like 10 years ago, and then a few years ago I got really into jujitsu. And in both of those things, what I really enjoyed about them is that you're constantly under like extreme duress, and your ability to like survive and perform is dependent on making good decisions under those circumstances. And I liked that. I liked being like more or less forced into getting good at that, and it's something I really wanted to get good at. And I think it's difficult unless you kind of just put yourself into situations where you have to. But it can also flip. There is a point at which it can be too much, and you can kind of push yourself to like an edge. I think having outlets where you can express yourself and you can be in those situations, but at the same time you can unplug from them. I think it's really important. But yeah, I think like I see it. I see that you're just doing 20,000 things, and I think you're like on top of all of them. And I think everyone's really excited about all the stuff that you're doing, especially around FarCon. So
Thank you.
I'm excited. I'm here for it.
Thank you. Also, what you said about needing an outlet, it was like last night. Still not feeling 100%, but I was like, I need to go surfing. I was like, it is the most beautiful night. And I just grabbed my board and went out with a couple of friends in the water. And I can't tell you like the instant switch I felt inside, and was like, oh my gosh, I've missed this so much. And I'm so grateful to live like right on the beach and be able to do that and to be able to see the sunset every night. So anyways, I agree. Got to create the life you want.
You do.
Yeah.
Wow. It's true.
Good feelings check in.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about the haterade.
Haterade. Okay, just so everyone knows, I have it on my phone. I'm just gonna say it, Mia, who is actually really funny. I love all of her memes. I love everything that she's done. She's posts a lot of funny content. She has like almost 10,000 followers on Farcaster, and ended up tweeting this whole kind of like long tweet about Farcaster and warpcast, and kind of ignited a lot of feedback. And you could tell that it upset some people. Some of the feedback was valid, some of the feedback not so valid. And Cameron then ended up posting this cast here, providing some feedback. And I think it ignited a very impactful, insightful conversation across all platforms, and also was like quite revealing about people's motivations and what matters to them when they're engaging in new platforms. So that's the context setting. Johnny, passing it over to you to maybe start diving into the so what.
Yeah, I think it's good criticism. I mean, I think a lot of this just sort of stems from the autofollow list. And that's been a very controversial thing basically since the beginning. I think that there's very fair criticisms. I've been thinking a lot. It's easy to dunk on it and say that it's unfair, it's cherry picked, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you have to consider this not just from the perspective of other people who are on Farcaster who are trying to build an audience and their perspective on, say, like one of the things she said that I thought was very valid is there's people on that list who don't even really cast all that much, and that just feels unfair and wrong for the people who do. And I think that's very valid. I was trying to think about this from the other side, which is basically like Dan's perspective. And I think when you're trying to craft, kind of this first touch experience, so someone just downloaded Warpcast and they open the app, the worst possible thing that you could see is nothing. And now you have to do this work of finding who are the high signal people. There is no better power user than Dan. Dan is on Warpcast all day, every day, and has been since the very beginning. So he has this he's like the network whisperer. Like he knows who's doing what. And so he's curating from all these different people that are really active and just want to have a silly goose time like me, and people who are extremely thoughtful and write long form essays on Ethereum network dynamics. And he's trying to curate that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's good. I think that's the right move. I think that it results in a first, your first UX is positive. You're like, wow, there's interesting people here, all kinds of interesting threads to pull on, and I can kind of choose my own adventure. If I want to get into meme coins, if I want to joke around, if I want to connect with other builders and founders and investors or whatever, you can go in all these different directions. So the way that he's achieving that is through this curated list. And yes, it's interest based. You say what you're interested in, but even those interests are curated themselves. So I don't know. I see both sides of it. I think it's fair criticism, but at the same time, I'm extremely sympathetic to Dan's position of trying to craft a great first experience. And so I think if you've got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, and I think that it's the right trade-off, and I think it's a difficult one. It's a difficult position to be in because inevitably people are going to be pissed. There's going to be some non-zero number of high value, high signal people that believe it's unfair, and rightfully so. But it's kind of a lose-lose situation there. But who wins? The new user, and I think that's the right thing to optimize for.
I have a couple of reactions. Is that first, I agree with you. There's a trade-off. It kind of relates to the Dracula app, which we'll talk about next, but it's really important to have content when you join. I think there are different implementations of it, but I think what Dan had done initially was it is the right choice, or what the Merkle team did initially is the right choice. I understand not wanting to auto follow. I think everyone should just realize you can unfollow. If you are auto following 50 people, it's not that hard to just go through and unfollow all 50 people who you find irrelevant to what you're doing. Totally fine. None of us would be offended. So that's one thing. I know Shoni,
and that happens.
Who has,
If you look at Farcaster user stats, the most followed people are actually some of the most unfollowed people as well.
Right. So that's number one. And then I also thought that the text, if we go back to the tweet itself that started saying a bunch of stuff, it was I thought it was conflating everything, and I engaged in the tweet, and ultimately it came down to it just being about the autofollow list. And I wish that the feedback had just been way more straightforward. So kind of taking a step back, and we can walk through this. Last pod, I even think I asked you, Johnny, where we were like, oh, Farcaster is a place where people give constructive feedback and we engage in discussions and have all this stuff. And we're this is a testament and also a reflection of the early culture that was there. And so for me, it was really jarring to read this tweet and know in my head that I was oh, Dan would have thoughtfully engaged with this and had an answer to everything. And it seems like there's a lot of misunderstandings or assumptions baked into this tweet, which for me, the alarms went off being oh, you didn't actually try to give this feedback in anywhere else. And I think to me, that is a signal in and of itself. I was okay, if you really understood and like cared for this product, which I'm sure she does, but I was just like, how do you think that this is the right way to go about giving this feedback when we all know that the team is like pretty receptive to feedback and always doing trade-offs in terms of like what's the highest priority in order to address some of it. So that was like one thing. I don't know if you have any quick reactions to that. Cause I remember asking you, Johnny, I was like, don't you think that's like idealistic of us? And you were like, yes. And like we both knew. And then I'm like, okay, here's our next podcast. Somebody is like not at all aligning with those values that we said were so kind of like in the DNA of the farcaster ecosystem. So
I think it would have gotten a lot more good faith engagement and discussion if it was like posted in the warpcast channel, and so it's, I don't want to assume the worst, but it's a little bit, it feels like a dunk to do it on Twitter, and not try to engage, with like the people on warpcast. So I don't know, I struggle with this. Like I mean, just kind of, this sort of leads into the Dracula thing. Like, I really like the saying, criticize privately, praise publicly. I think
same.
that's a very good, heuristic. And so it may, I don't know, I always feel like a little uncomfortable when I'm criticizing publicly. Now, that being said, sometimes, there are things that you do want to have a discussion about. You do want to be public, and because you're getting responses from other people, maybe you can change your own mind, like, so there's benefits to doing it publicly. But yeah, I don't know. I'm with you. Like, it's a little weird to kind of like go to another network to talk about something else. I guess I kind of understand it. I don't know. We should have her on. We should talk to her and see what she thinks, and see what other people think. Because it's not the first time it's happened. A lot of people dunk on Farcaster on Twitter. That used to happen more, but now it happens, I think, less. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a little weird.
I mean, I did engage, and I was like, "Can you explain more?" And because then the other thing that kind of irked me was like, again, she was like, it should be a neutral place, etc. And I think this goes back to actually our first podcast about people not really understanding like Farcaster versus Warpcast and conflating the two. And fundamentally, I don't believe that Warpcast should be a neutral client. It should be an opinionated client that gets users the most valuable experience that they can get on a social network. Period.
Yeah. Period. I actually don't think there is such a thing as a neutral client or a neutral protocol. Like, decisions are made, and those decisions are made by human beings who have a point of view on the world. And so there's no escaping that, like,
yep.
So yeah, I think you got to just embrace it, like,
right.
It is going to have opinions. You may not agree with them. That's fine. Like, this is the great Dan quote, like, go make your own client,
Client.
Yeah.
Go make your own client.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say too is that there's this kind of notion around the autofollow list, but then there is also, this elitism, the people who are on some of the autofollow lists like did nothing to add value, etc. And I think that to me is also an assumption that I can understand why you look at this list and you might think that. I think they're forgetting that we've been on this app for 2.5 years when no one was on the app. And I don't think you would look at somebody with a Twitter following of 20K or 50K who built that over 2.5 years and be like, they've added no value. So it was just interesting to me to be like, wow, if like we're in in the mindset of like all ships, rise with the rising tide, whatever it is. And like, we actually want everyone here to be better and to like, we want this to benefit everyone. It just came from a place. It was hard for me in my own mindset to be like, wow, I actually love it when everybody else in my network is doing well. And when people in Farcaster are getting attention or when they're kind of like hitting milestones and when they're achieving. And I always try to find the good and to be like, wow, they worked really hard and deserve this. And so to me, that was also, I was just like, man, like I'm bummed out because like you're kind of like, I don't know. So that's the last thing I'll say is I think it like really undervalued the amount of time and effort and like energy so many of us early to this network put in, when we very easily could have just like abandoned ship and spent our time elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I did take it a little personally, and I'm like willing and happy to admit that, because I was like, wow, this is just like somebody who doesn't understand what it was like to be super, super early.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it for a long time was very, I don't know, I feel like kind of low status, and you have to, anytime someone does something low status, it's risk taking. And if it flips, you have to respect that, and I think like, yeah, I'm with you. And at the same time, I think I think I said this last episode, like what growth looks like for Farcaster is nobody cares about this. Nobody cares about
No
the
one
work that we
cares.
did. It doesn't matter. All this early lore, it's irrelevant. It just doesn't matter. So like I think in I know what you mean, but at the same time, it's actually good. There should be more people
Yes.
who say this, who are irreverent and don't care, and they're like, look, I want my audience to grow. Fuck everybody else. Like I
Yeah.
actually think that's like a sign of growth. But yeah, I know what you're saying, and I don't disagree. And at the same time, I think like there's gonna be more of this for sure.
Oh, for
There's going
sure.
to be more of this. Okay,
I agree.
so Dracula.
Woo. Okay. First thing I will say is I am excited about Dracula the app, because there actually hasn't been anything recently in the consumer space where I've been like, wow, this is interesting. Say what you want about it. It's just a TikTok, sure. But it's a new type of content. Like, it's encouraging people to make videos that they weren't making before. It's exciting. It's like a new, fresh look at it. And like, as somebody who's made TikTok videos, and now all of a sudden I see how much money I'm making from a like decentralized network, I'm like, oh, this is actually interesting. And I'm kind of sick of all of these decentralized socials being mostly focused on text-based stuff. So, huge kudos to Alex for building something relatively novel in the Web3 space, even though it exists in the Web2 space. And I think for me, that is really valuable and important. And like, I applaud him for doing that. And I think it is good for the ecosystem and good for the space. So that's what I'll start with.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah, I have nothing bad to say. I think, there were a few, I think, rocky pieces that they kind of ran into that there was some pushback on. I think fairly so.
Well, you had a fraud. You got identity fraud.
Oh, multiple. I think there were like 3 different impersonators. And I think what was confusing to people and what upset people and what I found, I was like mildly annoyed, is I was like, you're letting people claim .eth names, which fine, that's great, but like verify that they own it. And so
Yeah.
it's just like that's not hard to do. Like technically that's not difficult to do. So it felt a little bit like, it just felt like a really big oversight. And I
Yeah.
think if like fundamentally what the product is about is trading on creators, then you really need to verify the like authenticity of that creator's identity. That's just like so central, I think, to the product. And so the fact that they missed that, I think, was a big oversight. Now, that being said, like, and I said this because I felt bad. I mean, I like Alex and I really respect him and his team. It's a totally fresh look, and what they're doing is like super interesting in all kinds of dimensions. Like, and so I just was like, man, I don't like that people are getting so pissed, and that's why I was like,
It
look,
was
I was like, shout out to Alex and team. Like, I know I'm a builder. I know what it's like. When you're building something, you can get so on the inside of it that you kind of lose the outsider's perspective. It's hard to see it with fresh eyes. And so that's what you launch for. You launch, you see what people have to say about it, you get valuable feedback, and then you iterate. And he's already done that. It took days for them to do it. So I think like Yeah, there was
It
an
took within
oversight.
hours. They did it like within 24
Yeah,
hours.
and there's always oversights. Like every product, you miss things, and if you don't, I would argue maybe you waited too long. If you launch it and everyone's like, "Oh my god, this is perfect," you should have launched it sooner. So also
Yeah.
too, that, like, never happens ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
Yeah.
the identity piece. The other piece, I think people were like, it kind of made the feed a little noisy, and I think people didn't
Yeah.
like that, especially after all the cleanup work that they did for some of the Pearl stuff. So, like, I think that's like, there is
Well,
this with Dracula. There are I've talked about this before. There's this Goldilocks zone of the computer and the casino, and I feel like Dracula is somewhere in that Goldilocks zone where it's not just degenerate gambling. There actually is video being created, and that's valuable, and you
right.
can kind of trade against that. So I think, like, the ingredients they're working with are fascinating. The viral sharing, earning from sharing. Obviously, we're doing that with Hypersub. I think, like, there's a fine line between that working really well and that it creates distribution, but it can flip very violently into, like, annoying the fuck out of everybody. And so I think, like, it's very difficult to get that balance right. I will say I think they're right in there. They're right in
Yeah.
that Goldilocks zone. I think they're doing great. So yeah, kudos to the
I
team.
agree.
Great product.
Mhm.
I want to use it. I'm trying to think about what I
Dude, you
could
need
do.
to okay, we'll do a little video thing. To add to that is I think they're in the like what could have instantly changed it feeling spammy is that, and I don't know if this is a Warpcast client thing or on the Dracula end, but a lot of times it was like, oh, I just earned blood watching this video. And then it was just a link and you couldn't see the video in the actual cast, which was, I think if that was just the video, no one would care because on Twitter, people share videos all of the time and it could have like text as like a here's what you're about to watch, or it's just a video with like no context at all, and it's no one complains about it. But I think it's just the fact that the cast was like, I just earned blood with like you would just have this like HTTP link and you wouldn't be able to see what the content was unless you left Warpcast was an issue. So I don't know if it's Alex or Dan and Varun, but you guys should fix that because everyone wants to see more video content on Warpcast. And I think it's easier to click a link and like watch the link the same way it works on Twitter instead of having to like upload a video directly. Although I do think the video, like I did it and it's like seamless, like it actually uploads the video and puts it into the cast. So I agree. I also don't think that they need to lean too much into speculation. Like people like video content and watch video content all the time. Look at Instagram Reels, look at TikTok, look at everything else. And I know leaning into like the friend tech model is very conducive to the crypto world, but I don't think I think it would have been valuable without leaning so heavily that way.
Agreed.
Because even right now I'm like, I don't like people can't buy my token because it's like too expensive. And I'm like, wait, what the hell? Like anyone should be able to buy my token if they want
Yeah.
to.
Well,
It's not that accessible, but Alex does say it's like way more accessible than friend tech, but I'm thinking like it's I don't know.
I agree. I mean, I think that's a property of the bonding curve, right? Like, as demand increases, so does the price. So yeah, this is what I don't like about bonding curves is that
Like
at some
fork
point,
me, stock split me. Like
yeah,
let
yeah,
people
exactly. So I think I think July had said something about this week, and I responded with, I forget who said this. It's this famous quote, but they said the only way to know what is enough is to know what is more than enough. And I think this is like so common in building things is that you actually have to go past. You have to like dial it up.
Yeah.
If you start at 0 and you're trying to find the sweet spot, which is say around 5 or 6, you kind of have to go to 11 first, and then you dial back. And I think, like, maybe going like full degen and then being like, okay, there's too much of an emphasis on the trading, which is maybe what we don't want. Let's dial it back. I think that's actually the right move.
Yeah.
Uh,
You've changed my
so
mind. You're right.
yeah, I get it, but it just
You're
depends on what
right.
they're trying to go for. If they're just trying to be like a casino and go full degen, then cool. But I don't know. I think there's oftentimes a lot of value to like going past the ideal point so that you can kind of come back. It's much easier to do that than the other way around, which is like
Agree.
inching your way to the thing. It's very difficult to like get to the thing. The last thing I'll say, and a couple other people mentioned this as well, is the name and the branding. Like,
I
it just
know.
doesn't do it for me.
I know.
Somebody else mentioned that as well. I'm kind of giving
Somebody
me the
else. Everybody.
Okay.
Everybody has mentioned it.
Yeah. So, and I think Horsefax had a great. He's like, I would just call it like video cast or something like that. And I was like,
Yeah.
or whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, the V is very memeable. You could do things with
Yes.
Nixon, with Richard Nixon, or Winston Churchill, or like
Yeah.
all kinds of fun
There's
stuff.
so
with, like,
much.
the V. Yeah. So I think like this notion, even saying it, like I earned blood. You know, I'm just.
I know. I know.
Ooh.
It's so. I can't. I was telling my parents about it, and I was like, I just used. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this like TikTok thing, because I wasn't about to tell them that like how it was gonna work.
Yeah.
But I think a rebrand is inevitable. Like I think
Yeah.
they know that a rebrand is inevitable. I know we've been talking about this for a long time. Two other things is that I was obsessed that it's actually degen integrated. Like degen's integrated, it's degen native. It makes it very farcaster native. And I think to me that was a huge promise. It's like you can either buy this token in ETH or in degen, and they worked with degen and got a grant from degen in order to do a lot of this. And to me I'm like, brilliant. And like also part of the reason why I was obsessed with degen is because I'm like, this is an actual way where you can seed and bootstrap a lot of farcaster clients, because people care about degen and it's like a currency outside of ETH. And because it's somewhat of a meme coin, it has like, people think about using it differently than they think about using ETH, which is even different than people think about US dollars. So
Yeah.
that's one. And then the last thing I'll say is, again, the warpcast farcaster thing continues to be like a sticking point, because even Dan called this a farcaster video client. And I think that was wrong because it's not built on farcaster, and all it had was sign in with farcaster, so you could link it. But because I was like, this is the whole promise of building on farcaster, is that you could really like the whole premise is, yes, it's a verification. Like you would be able to like verify your social identity, which is tied to your FID. And then there's so many other implementations of it. We were talking about this in the Club Tag group chat. And I also think that this is another huge like PSA and the greatest value proposition for anyone who wants to build a social or like a consumer app is like you want to be doing it in the Farcaster ecosystem, and you want to be talking about it in Founders Channel and everywhere else, because you're going to get really good feedback and you're going to get tons of people who are like, oh, here's the best way to actually integrate or build it on top of Farcaster. And I don't think you're going to get that in many other places where like so many people are eager to be like, here's how you can do it, because we're all obsessed and like want this future of Farcaster being the kind of whole decentralized social protocol to be there. So anyways, that's my last thing. Yeah, we could talk about that one forever. Also, everyone, this is another embarrassing thing. I worked with Alex ahead of time because, to the same point about like Dan needing an auto follow list, Alex was like, I need content on this app. And so they went through and downloaded like all of my old TikTok videos and uploaded them. And there's so many, like embarrassing amount, and there's no option to delete them. So everyone is like, this is my Dracula experience. Ted. Oh, Brian. Ted. And I'm like, oh my God, I am a spammer. By way of like just having so much content on that app, I am so spammy, and I'm like, so cringe.
That's you're totally wrong. They're so good. They're they're short. They're very information dense. They're like you're contrarian in many of them. Like I saw one where you were like, recycling is a scam. And I was like, hell yeah, let's go. Like, so I don't know. You should absolutely not be embarrassed. They're phenomenal. And I think it was very smart of Alex to just be like, I'm taking all of this. This is all going to be inventory on my app. I think that was very smart. So completely disagree with you on that.
Thank you. Let's go into our favorite topic.
Channels.
Channels.
All right, so we had a funny chat about this last night about the thing here is channel economics. I may have had a little bit of insight into what's coming. I can neither confirm or deny, but I think it's a very interesting topic, channel economics. And you are going to do an experiment or maybe considering doing it. Other people have as well. Skin in the Game did a party for their channel. Max Jackson did one for the crypto art channel.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. And I think I was thinking about this morning. I was like, okay, I want to talk about this honestly. And I don't want to just come off as a hater and talk shit about other people and builders and approaches. So I think like a version of this happened early on with DAOs. And I think we talked about this previously too, where I was like, I came off, I think, really negative and as a hater. And when really I was just trying to like talk honestly about what I was seeing happening. So before we jump into this, I just want to be very clear. Like, number one, super supportive of anybody on the frontier being in the arena, trying new things. Like, hell yeah. I support you. Like, full stop. Okay, so now I do have
now what's about to come.
I mean, I think that it's also important to be honest and to like think and talk critically about some of these experiments. So like I would just say, I don't understand the impulse to do like group wallets, like group treasuries. We do this. We have to do this for Fabric stuff, and it's work. It's like effort. It's like actually like not fun to do. So when I think about doing this with friends or like people on Farcaster, I'm like I don't want to do that. But even if you said no, it's
hold
fun.
on. Let's give a good example. Like give us like I know let's just use like a concrete example because people who are listening might not know what we're referencing.
Okay, so we're talking about a multi-sig. Basically, it's a wallet wherein you have multiple signers, and so in order to do anything, you need a majority of people to sign and to execute. And so like Fabric does this for when we do deployments on new networks, when we deploy new factory contracts, when we change fees. If we have to set up a splits contract and that has a new fee structure for a partner. And it's the analogy might be like, you ever seen like a movie where in order to open the like bank vault door, you have to have, like there's two separate keys and you have to have one person on either side of the door and they have to turn the key at the same time to open the door. That's like the equivalent of what you're doing with a wallet. So it requires quite a bit of coordination. It's even hard to do with a really small team of like 2 or 3 people. So when you think about doing this with like 100 people or more, it's, there's effort there, there's work there. But that aside, what's the use case? What does it actually mean to have a channel treasury that the participants in that channel, the people who follow it and engage the most often, control the funds? Like to do what? What's the outcome that we're trying to produce?
Yeah. And I've thought about this too. And just so everyone knows, a little bit of alpha is like, I'm thinking about doing a multi-sig or like a treasury for Club TED. And just to be clear, it wouldn't be the entire channel. It would be the 69 members of Club TED. And thinking through like, how do we make this valuable? The thing about where I think about this on channels and what people were saying, and I think Proxy Studio wrote a whole piece about this, was saying channels should have wallets, to your point. And he says that it would allow them to receive donations, they could take collective action, they could compensate channel mods or contributors, they could receive tips for the channel. And then he goes in and does say like, there's some issues with it. Like it's not an EOA, it's not a multi-sig. So like how would it work? And then, you could do it with Party DAO where every room has a chat and a wallet. And I thought more and more and more about this, even as I was thinking about Club TED. And I was like, this sounds so fucking complicated. Like that was my reaction, was like, this is so fucking complicated.
It is.
And I was like, and like, what if this and what if that? And like, even with purple, I'm like, purple, it's like sometimes really hard to get voting up. And like with it moving to vase, I'm sure more people will vote now that it's not $17 to vote. But I was like, this is so complicated. And if anything, Johnny, you and I can talk forever about the future of channels, about how they're like actually societies and like economies within a channel. But that vision is like so far off that I'm almost like DAOs are trying to be that vision, like in present day, but there isn't enough, like, who wants to do that? I don't know.
Yeah, this is the quintessential question. Is like, look at someone like Chris Corella, just diehard champion of purple. I'm very impressed with what he's done. I think it's it's awesome.
Right.
It's so rad, you know, like, and Phil was a very early from Bright Moments, very early participant and supporter. I feel like those people are so rare, you know, just people
Yes.
who care and who put the work in and who like are really the champions of this thing. You need those people to move these things forward, and they're rare. You know, they're hard to find, and like you know, they're doing so much work. To your point, it's like it's complicated, and someone has to like put in the effort to understand the complexity and like to communicate it to others. And I guess for me, that's where I go back to like, okay, we're describing the squeeze, but what's the juice? Like,
Yeah.
you know, what do you get for this work? And that's what is the big question mark in my mind. I like, tell me what it is, you know, like, and I'm open to it. And but the thing is, you also have to compare it against alternatives. Like, this is the thing about, like, Thomas Sowell, I think, has this thing about you know, the difference between government and private industry is that like government only measures outputs, whereas private industry measures outputs relative to inputs. And so it's not enough to just say we did this thing. It's like, okay, but relative to other alternatives, like, is that impressive? And I think, like, if you say, oh, our group, you know, our group wallet or our DAO did X, it's like, okay, but you know, could you have done this in like a much faster, cheaper, more efficient way? And if so, like, maybe that isn't very impressive. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is like, what novel outcomes can be produced or are being produced with this approach. And I don't know what they are. I really want to be not proven wrong, because I don't feel like I'm pushing a point of view here, but like, I just want to know, like, what is something that we could all look at and go, damn, that's amazing. And the only way they could have done that is with a multi-sig, you know, and with the shared treasury. And I just don't know what that is.
Right. I will say, I agree with you. There is value in DAO-esque channels. Like, if you do the nouns auction, like, in theory, you could make a channel like a nouns ecosystem. There's a frame where you can bet on the auction, or you can bid on the auction. There's a frame where you can vote in the feed. There's a frame where you can submit proposals. Like, that to me makes sense, where like, oh, okay, like the channel is just empowering and accelerating a lot of what makes nouns a DAO in a way. But to work in the reverse direction, where you start with the channel and then make it into a DAO, I'm not sure I get it, in a way. And even with Nick's skin in the game treasury community multi-sig, is that they're very intentional about it. And it's about like acquisition. Like, what are we buying with the treasury? And also, they're rewarding people who are acting aligned with the values. And so it's like two things. It's like, okay, like we're actually picking up people who are aligned with the values of this. So they're curating and like strengthening a community very intentionally. It's like once a month. Like, it's not like, oh, here's 10,000 people in the channel added to this DAO multi-sig. Chaos if they did that.
Right.
And then they have like okay, like we actually need to buy things and acquire things with the multi-sig. And obviously it's going to be centralized because Nick is the visionary behind it. And he just has other people kind of like have a sense of ownership and buy-in around it. So I think there's like different implementations, but I think just making a channel on its own, a DAO in a way, I just don't, again, I would whoever's experimenting with it, please tell us how it goes in the next few
Yes.
months, because I'm a healthy skeptic. I'm not saying it's a bad idea.
Yes.
I'm just having a hard time connecting the dots, looking at the future, given what we already know and given what we've seen on Farcaster already.
Yes.
Warpcast, whatever the fuck we want to call it.
I think we're aligned. That's my view on it. We should have John or Chris or someone, Danny, from Party to come and enlighten us, and because that's my view as well. I'm like, okay, I'm skeptical, but I'm like hungry to, like,
I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I want to see more. I'm not connecting the dots right now.
That's how I felt. I don't know if you remember, I also casted before my little experiment, which I don't even think we'll talk about, but we probably can get to it when we talk about like feed stuff. But I had casted, I said, okay, last question before I head off. VCs, like, why did you guys all invest so much money in DAOs in like 2020 and 2021? And it was a genuine question. And I think there were a lot of people who messaged me and was like, I can't believe, like, why are you shitting on DAOs? And I was like, guys, I asked a question that I was curious about learning, because I don't want to assume that there was no strategy or that it was just hype driven. And the answers were really insightful. People should take a look at them, especially from Variant responded, Alok from, I'm blanking, responded. There was tons of like very thoughtful answers in terms of why people invested in DAOs. And I think because of what they learned then, they're approaching it very differently now. But I do know that there's also like this core group, this core contingency who thinks that there's going to be another wave of DAOs and DAO tooling, who's really excited about that. And what I'm saying is, like, if we're skeptical, we're not hating on it. We want to be convinced. Like, we are so open-minded. Like, just convince me. And like, I'm on board. And like, we experimented with Party DAO for like a FarCon squad to see like, okay, how can we fund side events? And like, we'll see how that works. But I wasn't going to shut it down, because it is an interesting experiment. I just don't know if I'm going to put my time and energy into that experiment.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, my view on this is that, the quintessential question that every product must answer is, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
What do I get? And I think DAOs have a tough time, of answering that question in a really compelling way. And it has to be answered in the context of the work that you're asking people to do.
Yeah.
Okay, you want me to do work? What do I get? And, I think that the balance with DAOs is often very asymmetrically skewed to, you have to do a lot of work, but you don't actually get that much. Like, one thing I said is, I think this is kind of a controversial statement, but I was like, nobody wants co-ownership. Everyone wants ownership, or something to that effect. Like, and I think that, this notion of, well, we all own the thing. It's this kind of tragedy of the commons. Like, well, if we all own it, then nobody owns it. And if I don't, and I think like everybody acting in their own economic self-interest that's reality. That's what I think is the most true. And I think like, with DAOs, you have to figure out a way where you can still produce these collective outcomes that, but every single member is acting in their own interest. And, there's like this is like very much this is like Adam Smith's kind of like, the invisible hand of the market, where it's like, the baker does what's best for the baker. And it just so happens that's actually good for the rest of the people in the community. And I think like, I haven't seen an example of a DAO that's like really done that. An example of something that has, I would say, would be DGen, actually. Like,
yes,
like DGen, if you think about it, is this massive coordinated, there's like collective action happening there, but it's all happening in, like, the reason why it's propagating is because every single individual holder is doing what's in their own best interest, or at least, that's what they think. And so, and then as a result, this thing has grown and propagated, and now it's like, if you think about it as an organism, it's now, inside of Dracula, and it's inside of these other things. It's like growing and growing, but it's not growing through votes. It's not growing through proposals or through some kind of organizing body. It's growing in this kind of bottom up, more chaotic, market driven way. And I think like when I think about the promise of collective action, DAO collective action, I think it's going to need that fundamental property, of like,
Yeah.
people are like, oh, it's very clear what's in it for me here, and I'm going to take action based on that. I don't think that they've really nailed it.
No. But I also feel we're probably talking about a certain type of DAO. We're like, oh, these like early stage DAOs that are setting out with a mission to accomplish X, Y, or Z. And I think when I set my DAO message, and I talked to Greg about this a little, because Uniswap Foundation in theory is a DAO. ENS Foundation DAO, like all of those are also considered DAOs. And so I almost feel in this next wave, what crypto needs to do is to get more specific about the language that we're using. And we need to move beyond describing everything that uses a certain infrastructure as that. So for instance, DAOs, there's 100 different types of DAOs, the same way that there's 100 different types of companies, but you're not going to call this like a public like Fortune 500 company the same thing as a Series A startup. And I think that's what we're starting to do with DAOs is like DAOs just an infrastructure, and we need to be way more specific about what it actually is. And I feel the same way about NFTs. I've thought a lot about this too, because my fabric like my hyper sub is technically represented as an NFT, but I would argue it's incredibly different than a one of one art
Yeah,
NFT. Yet
totally.
everyone is calling them NFTs. And so again, it's the same thing would be like calling all of your clothing cloth in a way. Like,
Mhm.
oh, like that's such a cool cloth. Like, where did you get it? And it's like, no,
Mhm.
actually, are you talking about my shirt? Are you talking about my pants? Are you talking about my socks? And so I think this next wave for us to really move beyond how we're describing all of these primitives is to start being more specific about what it actually is. Like my
Yeah,
Hypersub NFT is actually a membership card. Um and stuff
yeah,
like that. So that's just the last thing I'll say about this is that there's so much confusion even as we talk about DAOs, because I'm
yeah.
like, wait, I think what Uniswap Foundation is doing is really incredible. And if that's a DAO, I don't want to be talking about DAOs like that when we're
Right.
talking about like a brand new tiny thing.
That's well said. That's why I kind of just am like, what's the outcome? Like, screw
Yes.
the labels. Like, what are the use cases? What outcomes are being produced? And we can kind of figure out what that means, like after the fact.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I agree.
Ooh,
Okay.
DAOs. I
Yeah, I
can't believe we
know.
just talked about DAOs. We were
Yeah,
like, the other
it's
episode, we were like, governance? No way. We
yeah.
will not talk about it. But we just spent a good amount
Well,
of time on
it's
DAOs.
such a deep, like, it's such a deep rabbit hole, and it's like it's very wonky. It's very much like policy wonk, kind of stuff, and it gets very dry and kind of boring. And I think we both have a lot of experience kind of in and around DAOs and have thought so deeply about it, which is I think why our first instinct is like, oh no, like I don't want to get into that,
Yeah.
because it's like a whole thing to unpack. So we've, I think,
Yeah.
unpacked a lot of it now, and now in the future we can always go back and be like, oh, we actually already had that conversation. It's
Yeah. No more.
yeah,
But we started talking about DAOs because we talked about channel DAOs, and I fundamentally still think like channels aren't going to be there yet. And right now we go to channels for content. And right now we go to channels to see people posting about similar interests. And that brings us to channel feeds and main feed updates.
yes.
So, where do we want to start? Channel feeds? Let's start with
Yeah, I
channel
think we should
feeds.
start with like the big change that they made this week, which I'm very excited about, which is that you basically have two tabs now. You have, I think it's all and trending. I think those are the labels. But you basically have a container, like you have a feed where just everything goes. And then there's an algorithm, which they shared publicly, that determines what promotes, maybe for lack of a better term, a cast that's in the trending tab to, sorry, the all tab to the trending tab. So it's, and that algorithm is basically if the host of the channel likes the cast, it gives it an enormous amount of weight, which effectively just bumps it right into the trending tab. Or if by default it just gets a certain amount of likes within a certain time frame, it will also get promoted into the trending tab. And what I think is interesting about this is that it now creates sort of two paths for something within a channel, whereas before you had one. So before, like for example, with memes, it's got 115,000 followers. you post something there, instant distribution. So if you have an active day with say 20,000 QDAO and you post something in memes, there's a good chance like quite a lot of those people are going to see it. This attracts a lot of shilling and scams and just garbage. And it meant that the hosts needed to do a lot of what they call negative actions, which is like banning or hiding or whatever.
It
And
takes so much time.
it's so much work. It's
It's
so
so
much
much work. It's
And
so I have a fraction of the amount that you have in Farcon, and it's so annoying. It just puts you in a bad mood.
Yeah. It really is work. Like it's like a job. And so they were like, okay, this isn't scalable. We need to make it more of a positive action. So rather than trying to play whack-a-mole, it's like you're promoting things. And so I think there's the HN algo and Reddit were obviously huge like inspirations here. But the basic idea now is like everything just gets dumped into this all tab, and then only the best stuff goes into the trending tab. And if the channel host, say, goes on vacation for a week and they don't really like anything, then that's fine. The best stuff will still bubble up. But then if they are active and they are liking stuff, it'll bubble up faster than it otherwise would. So I think this is great. One thing I noticed pretty much immediately after they launched it yesterday was I was like, oh shit, there's kind of some pressure to like stuff. Like if you see something bubbling up and it's like a banger, you kind of don't want it to get lost. You want to promote it into the main feed as fast as possible, which I'm fine with. You know, I think, but yeah, those are the main changes that they announced. One of the things I said to Dan is, you know, what I really like about this, especially with regard to the channel pass now, is that the channel pass essentially is saying you can post into this channel. You're guaranteed, you know, the option to publish, but not distribution. Where you're going to get distribution from is if you post a banger.
Yeah. Again, curation is way more powerful than moderation.
Yes.
And it's so funny. I'm not saying that we predicted this, but we were talking about it and was like, people love to curate, people hate to moderate. It's always been that way.
Yes.
And I think this is the perfect step in the right direction. And I fundamentally believe that I don't like the downvote. And I know we talked about it, and I know some people love it on YouTube because like it'll tell you if something's legit or not. But I'm like, at the end of the day, like people don't like getting downvoted. And I think this is a great way to, again, just emphasize the positive, some like positive interactions, which make people feel good. Like hiding, warning, don't make people feel good. But posting, engaging with good content makes people feel really good. And I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm excited to see it. I think they have a very interesting, like, again, how does this scale to other clients? I think this is a good algorithm for other clients to be able to like say yes or no. Do they want to opt into this or not opt into it? I even think Waj posted saying like, hey, should I implement some of this? I don't know if that was about that or UX changes. So I'm excited about it. But again, another challenge is the memes channel is like so different in scale than the TED channel or than the Farcon channel or than the Club TED channel. And I think this is valuable for a lot of channels, but also for new channels because sometimes the best content is hidden. And also like my favorite part about Reddit is always being able to see like the trending, like I'd never do chronological. I'm always like, what's trending, what's hot.
Yep. Same. Yeah. So I'm really excited about it. I think I agree. It reduces the like negative actions, you know, that you have to do or that are done on you. And I think instead it just sort of says like, you're going to go into this big bucket and the cream will rise to the top and that's it. No one really has to do anything. The other, you know, lever here is using something like AutoMod where I forget the guy's name who built it, but it's essentially like a bot that you can add as a co-host to your channel, and it will take some of those negative actions, you know,
for you
programmatically for you. So it kind of inserts this layer between you and other people. So I think that's another nice like hook. The other thing too is that this solves the problem of, like we talked about this last time, where you know there's maybe some things that you want to be private, but you can't do that if it goes on chain. this new structure, I think there's a very clear path to codifying this in the protocol, and it mitigates some of those issues of like, blowback. So I think it's great. I think they like nailed it, to be honest.
Me too.
And so I'm excited to see. It's going to get gamed. I think that was another thing Dan said. He's like, well, with the way the like works, the liking and time works, you can kind of like throw bots at it and game it. But
what it was his quote? He was like, then we destroy them with math. Like it was like the
right. Yeah.
We're gonna have to pull up a screenshot of that and share it because it's truly one of the funniest quotes I think I've ever read.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to add?
I think I also want to just give a little shout out to farcaster and Adrian because they were experimenting with a whole bunch of ways because they've gotten a huge influx of spam in farcaster, and they're like, how do we deal with this? Like, this isn't what the channel's meant to do. And so they went pretty hard on, I don't want to call it like moderation, just like vibe checking. And I think this will help a lot. But having experiments where you try new things in channels and can give feedback on that is really helpful. I even think Dan was like, it completely changed farcaster, where once they had the trending, it was so much easier for everyone else to see the good content. And so it's a win-win-win for like truly everyone. I don't know. I agree with you. I think they nailed it. And, a lot of people, I think we all sometimes are impatient and want the solution now. And I think this is just a testament, goes back to this whole conversation about like urgency. What was it? Urgency versus, do you know what I'm talking about? It was like the Dan thing. It was like, you have to move fast.
Oh, focus and urgency.
Focus and urgency, where I was like, this is actually like this was like a perfect execution of that because it came at the exact right time as spam was like bubbling over and everyone was getting annoyed again. And then here it is. And I think we'll see how it works. But I think it will work really well.
Yeah.
So I hope it does.
Agreed. Me too. Okay. Solana meme coins. I missed this.
Wait, hold on.
Completely.
You missed this?
I have no idea what's happening in the world.
Okay. One other thing too, before we also go in, is that there were also major feed changes. So it was really funny that I last week was like, I'm doing a new experiment where I'm just going to be in my direct messages entire week. And to like the precursor to this is that I got a lot of shade because I went through this exercise where I was like, I need to unfollow everyone. If I was seeing content that I didn't like, but from people that I liked, I unfollowed. We've talked about this a couple times. I have like tons of PSAs where I'm like, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. So my feed has always been quite good. And I was like 24 hours after unfollowing pretty much half the people that I was following, I had an amazing feed. So I didn't have a bad feed. And then when I was but it was really hard to find the good stuff. So like not everything was that relevant. And then I just went into my direct messages to be like, okay, here are tons of people. And I missed the conversations. I missed having like deeper conversations. And so I went into direct messages and group chats and pretty much had 5 days where that was all I did. And it was so fulfilling and I loved it because we were really fleshing into like interesting conversations and connecting with people in a way that the main feed wasn't allowing you. And then all of a sudden I come on and people are losing their absolute minds over the feed. Even Brian Guan was like, okay, he was like 24 hours after I said Dan's a dictator, he was like, we need to fix the feed. And so I forget what they did, but they came out and made a completely different main feed. And I think the changes that Varun made were take casts from who you're following and order them in reverse chronological, move casts higher if they're from someone who you interact with a lot. And so like that's huge. Like you're actually seeing more casts from people who you interact with, which then will make you interact with them more and drive more connections. Move casts higher if they have more engagement. And then I think move casts lower if you've already seen them. So I was like, everyone was saying, wow, this is a huge improvement almost immediately. So again, another kudos. I don't know if you had an experience with that. I wasn't on main feed, so I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not the best like person here. Like my farcaster like experience, it's really changed since growing. I mean, I check basically like 3 things. I put a lot of time into memes, and I look at the trending feed and I look at my notifications tab and I look at the fabric channel, and that's basically it. And it like makes me sad because I feel like I miss out on a lot of good conversations. But
Yeah.
just in the things I just mentioned, there's so much work to do. Like there's a lot of questions, people asking about hypersub, people making feature requests, like meme stuff to do. Like it's like I
Yeah.
don't have the time to just sort of browse like and engage in like interesting conversations. It also makes me sad like I don't have the time to do this in group chats either. Like, and I'll keep up on some of the Club TED stuff or some of the other group chats, and I'm just like, damn, there's just too much good stuff
Yeah.
and not enough time in the day. So yeah, like I think someone had mentioned this in one group chat. They're like, can I just get like a TLDR of the last like 50 messages?
Yeah, I think it was Pugson. He was like, what's happened in the last 2
Yeah, and
weeks?
I'm like, I want that. I'm like, I want to come to a group chat that's like 100 unread messages and just be like, what did I miss? What are the main things?
There's a Telegram bot that does that.
That would be nice. I mean, that would be a cool feature to have. Do you feel like why is it that you can't have those engaging conversations in the main feed, like outside of group chats? Like, why do they have to happen inside the group chat?
From that experiment, again, most of the experiments I do are for client explorations in a way. So like the unfollowing, I was like, okay, like this means that you should have like a close circle, or like warpcast should like encourage people or figure out a way to like only like everything I do is with a purpose. And so that DC and group chat one was actually making me think closer to, oh, what if there is just a client that focuses on like real-time conversations? Because we don't have that. Like no one, even on Twitter, even on Reddit, even on a lot of these, you're not having real-time conversations, or it's just the feedback loop is a little bit longer than if you're in a group chat or anywhere else. And this again goes back to Unlonely, and why I think Unlonely was so core to our early Farcaster experience is because it was the only place where you could have real-time discussions. So I think a client would do really well where it's almost like AOL, like super, super early AOL instant messenger, where it's like forums, but it's like live, like it's just like a huge group chat with random people, and you're able to like comment and have discussions on certain topics in there because people want to engage that way. Whether you're in there for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or whether you spend an hour in there is one thing. And then you could also build in an audio version. So I think what's unique is like some people actually don't want a clubhouse because they don't want to be talking, and people would rather be writing. But I think having something like that would be a great client, where you can go in and have real-time discussions about some of the topics. Like no matter what, even in if I cast like a really interesting question and tons of people are replying, I want to be able to have like real-time conversations with them, but I can't, and other people can't either on Farcaster. So that
In the
was one
feed.
thing. In the feed, yeah, like in the feed. I just don't, my notifications like yours are a little out of control. It's sometimes hard to capture it. I'd rather just have a real-time conversation. And sometimes I have time. Like when I'm in Club TED and we're like diving into some of these topics, I'm just like was on a plane and was able to text and go back and forth and back and forth, and somebody else was also free. You can't do, there's nowhere you can do that right now in the Farcaster protocol. Like there's no client that allows you to do that except in group chats.
And do you think that's like a UI issue, or what? Like, why is it the case? Is it an issue with notifications, or because it's like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is we just talked about how there's all these feed improvements, but then I'm like wondering like, were there really improvements if you can't have the kinds of discussions publicly that you used to be able to have, and now you have to have them privately? Like, it seems like there's a
I
lot
think
of
it's a different
value.
purpose. I think it's a
Okay.
different purpose. So again, like we'll have a discussion in Club TED and then I'll pose it to everybody else, and people will continue to share their conversations publicly. So there's some people who only do it in Club TED because of like the private public thing, but there's a lot of people who do it because it wasn't posed on main feed, and like they have a discussion, we start fleshing it out, and then they're like, oh, this is a great conversation to have in public. I just think it's like it's a different purpose, and like
Okay.
Warpcast could do it. But again, the other thing with group chats and why I think this should be a client in a way is a lot of people, and myself included, I just mute a group chat that I'm not interested in. And then I don't get notifications. So I don't know when a conversation's coming up. Like, oh,
Mhm.
this is actually something, oops, I'd rather like dive into. I just like have it muted always. Or like if I pop in and it's active, then great. And I think a lot of people do that. Like I
Got
don't
it.
think like 100+ group chats are not ideal
No, it
for
just
like if you want to real time discuss topics
yeah.
like you used to in an AOL instant messaging forum.
So, do you think that private channels would like I
No, I
actually
think private channels would fail. I've said this so many times.
okay,
Everyone's like, I want an OG channel. I want this. And I'm like, no, I just
let
don't
me
think it's going to solve.
okay, what is the difference between a group chat and a private channel? They're the same thing.
The threading, unless you get the threading in a group chat better, I hear you, it's the same, but it's different from a UX perspective.
I see.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think it's different.
Right,
But I don't know how
because
I feel about like token, like NFT gated
I
channels.
know you don't. I'm very excited about this, but that's the fundamental difference, though. Is that
It's a UX thing right now.
is that in a group chat, there's no such thing as a cast. It's just like a message, and you can respond to people's messages, and it's one giant conversation. Whereas in a channel, like you have casts, and these kind of like their own threads of discussions. But if
A group
you
chat is just Discord. Like if you had a private, like I think it all comes down to the UX. I don't know.
yeah, the UI, yeah, I agree.
Or yeah, UI, sorry.
Like you just format the content a little in a slightly different way, and then you go from like a private channel to a group chat. But if you
I
I
don't
think they're
know.
super similar things. The format is a little different, but like for example, Matthew made like as like a hackathon, like a
Oh
weekend.
yeah.
He
I
made
like
like
that.
it was like a farcaster client that formatted everything like iMessages.
Hmm.
Do you remember this? I forget what he
Yeah,
called
I
it.
liked it.
Our chat or
Actually,
something.
we should look into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So like that makes me wonder like could could an interface like that facilitate the kinds of discussions you're describing? And the reason why I'm interested in this is because there is so many interesting conversations that are happening in group chats, and I don't know, I think it'd be better if they were happening
I
publicly.
agree.
Like I think you'd
I
get
agree.
more perspectives, you'd get you know like what makes Farcaster so special is that you know like-minded people can find each other, and I think a big part of how they find each other is through these sorts of discussions. So it's like a little sad to me that they've like migrated into group chats, because I think that there's probably all kinds of interesting people with interesting takes that are maybe new to the network, and they're not part of these discussions, which maybe they have a lot to add to them. So yeah, I don't know,
I
maybe
think
there's
it's
just like
cool.
a
I mean, group chats and DCs are not on the protocol layer right now. Like it's only
yeah,
on warpcast, and so I do think that there's an opportunity for a client to build like real-time forums, and it doesn't
yeah,
have to be in group chats. I think that'd be cool.
yeah.
Personally, I'm not gonna build it, but I don't have time. Going back to the beginning, I have no time, but it would be I think it'd be cool because a lot of
Me
us
too.
are really, yeah, a lot of us want to have those conversations.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I really want a path. Do you remember Path? You were probably like
No.
in junior high or something when Path came out. But like it was like it was like a small social network. You would follow like 10 people or something. You would
Hmm.
like pick your like really small group. And I think that would be I like really want someone to make this or have like a feature where you can just have like your core group of people that you're it's still public,
Yeah.
it's still like a social network, but it's not this like blasted out, you know, thing where
Yeah.
it's like really noisy. Like I think Instagram does something like this.
Instagram's good at it. They have a lot of like close friends and
Yeah.
following. I've thought a lot about this from an Instagram perspective because Dan cast it, I think, yesterday. He was like, I don't understand why someone hasn't done a photos only client, read only. And I'm like, I do because nobody wants that. It's like no one wants a client where you're just scrolling through photos. Like
Yeah.
no. Like I maybe used to do that on like Flickr. I don't know if you remember like Flickr was like a
Yeah.
you just like post photos. No one wants that. Like that's not a social network. Like that's
Yeah.
a gallery. And I think yeah, anyways. So it makes me think like a lot about like why wouldn't somebody build this when people use it? And to your point of like you want like a close friends, you want people you engage with, you want to like connect. I'm like, Dan, your client is like the least connected. I think somebody else responded and was like, what? Like, do you actually think this is a no-brainer idea? And sorry, Dan, like I have so much respect and admiration for you, but that idea just like I was like, dude, what? I didn't respond to it. I was like, this doesn't even deserve a response.
Brian quoted him and said, because you would be their competitor and you're a formidable client builder.
Yes. Also, like, no one wants a read-only client. Like, I'm sorry. Even if most people are on Instagram and not actually engaging, that in and of self is a choice that they make. Like,
Right.
to
They have
engage
the
or
option.
not to engage. And so
Yeah.
it almost is like an act in and of itself. Anyways, we could go on and on about that. But I know we're cruising.
We're like
I
way
will
over
go.
time.
I know, but we always cut out like 25 minutes when we're
Yeah.
editing because we go
We have a lot of ums. Also, too, apparently we talk slow. I don't feel like we're talking slow, but when I listen back, I'm like,
Oh my God.
there's something wrong with us. Like, how
Yes.
are we talking so slow? Yeah. So
I've thought about that a lot. Okay, last thing. There's also UI changes. I think the only thing we have to say about the UI changes, the button thing is really funny. My favorite thing about Dan and Varun is that they always lean into memes and like poke fun at themselves and then make a fix. So I think that's all we have to say about it. We can do like our favorite memes at some point. And then the last thing I want to say, I guess there's two things. What's really interesting right now is that there's a huge surge in Solana meme coins. Like
okay.
huge. There's Geo Bowden, there's Elizabeth Horan, there's Jensen for like NVIDIA. There's all of these meme coins going and they're taking off. And, you know, I complain a lot about meme coins or like these memes and like quote unquote spammy things on warpcast. And I'm like, oh, we've added the Solana connected address. But because transactions are only on Optimism, I think, and like Base, and like I think even Greg tried to do like Ethereum mainnet L1, and it was like really, really hard. But I was like, oh, I actually am curious if we had transactions on Solana enabled, because people are loving like the degen swaps that Greg did as well. I wonder if it would have more Solana activity. We're just not there yet, and it's not a priority. But that was the only thing I would say, is because the energy and community around Solana right now is really strong around these meme coins, like every weekend. And we're pretty much siloed and protected from it on Warpcast, which I'm not going to complain about. Everyone knows how I feel about quality stuff, but it makes me, it's interesting. That's just all I wanted to say about it. I don't know if anybody who's listening has anything to add to that conversation. Please let us know. But that's it.
Yeah. I've like completely missed out on all this, so I don't have anything to add. I don't know. I think meme coins are kind of PvP games, and
it's interesting. So Seed Club launched their own meme club on the Zora network, right? And I don't know, I didn't even know what it was. I just remember seeing it, and then I think I looked into it and was like, oh, this is interesting. But in my opinion, and I don't know this, I haven't heard anything about it in the past couple weeks, or past couple days. I don't know if that's because my main feed is like so good or because it's actually fallen off the radar. And I think it's because it was a top-down meme coin, whereas Higher, like what Six and Martin and I think a bunch of other people have done as well, is this like bottoms-up community meme coin with Higher that has allowed it to take off and kind of build a community around it in a very interesting way. So we can have another call we can add this to like next week or the next week after and just do like an analysis of Farcaster being like, can you incubate meme coins here and which ones do well versus which ones don't? Because degen also meme coin, there are other meme coins that also fizzled out. And I think it's interesting to look at it. Everyone's like, meme coins are sticking around. It's like their cultural movements. And I think I want to do like a full analysis on it.
I do too. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and especially recently, like seeing this boost. It's also totally sniped a lot of builders who are like building
Right?
something, and then they're just like, oh, I'm going to go build a meme coin. Even artists, I think,
Pearl.
yeah, I think a lot of like artists and creators are kind of, playing with meme coins. So I think that there's definitely something there. There's like a there, but I think there's also like a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that's just like not creating value. Or it is, but
Yeah.
only for some people and not for others. Like I think of it as kind of this game of musical chairs. We should unpack it. I think that's like a
Yeah,
good
we
thing
should
to head
unpack it
into for
next
the next
week.
episode. Like there's lots of interesting, there's lots of good, there's lots of bad. I don't know. I'd be curious to get into it. And like the great thing about making content and putting it out there is that people will tell you if you're wrong. So we can
Yeah.
kind of share our takes, and then I'm actually very curious to like what we were saying earlier about kind of the like DAO stuff is like enlighten us, help
Yes.
me help me like see the world in a new and a different way. So yeah, I'd love to do that with meme coins. I think that would
Me
be a fun
too.
conversation. So let's do that next week. And then also we need to talk about the special edition episode with Keckers and Greg that we need to re-record.
Oh, we need to re-record that. You
Yeah,
guys, it was actually so sad. I had done another hotel Wi-Fi recording, and it got lost in the ethers. So Johnny and I had this amazing idea after, though, because we had such a good idea. And also kind of like going back to the beginning of this episode when we were talking about haterade and like, oh, no one actually cares about farcaster lore, but we do. And I think some of our early friends do. And there's actually no archive of it. And also not everyone buys however much storage I buy. I'm embarrassed to even admit how much storage I've bought. So everyone's casts like start disappearing at some point and all of our lore will disappear. I care about that. Johnny, I think you care
I
about
do too.
it
Yeah.
too. And so exciting news is that we're gonna, I don't know what we're calling it. It might just be many such cases farcaster lore, but we love guest episodes and want to bring on like all of our favorite early farcasters to share their perspective on what it was like in the beginning.
That's
And
right.
yeah.
So we're going to be
Exciting.
recording them. We'll be dropping them soon. If you have anyone that you want us to talk to, please let us know and we will get them on.
Woo!